Hi, my name's Jennifer. Welcome to my channel. Today I thought I would run through all the books on my list for the Queer TBR Tackle. So the Queer TBR Tackle has been devised by Jen from Jen the Librarian and Greg from Supposedly Fun. And the idea behind the Queer TBR Tackle is that throughout the year they are hosting a number of read-alongs of several queer books, and they are also encouraging people to create their own queer TBRs for the year. So I thought I would join in. I have a number of queer books on my TBR. So what we have here is the first section will be all the fiction books that are new to me that I've never read before. Then there's a couple of non-fiction that I would like to read. And then we'll end with a few queer books that I'm hoping to reread over the course of the year. So start off with, there are 3 books which I already own and I've owned for some time and I keep meaning to read and I don't know why I haven't read them yet, so I need to do it. First is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This is about a young man who is writing a letter to his mother who is illiterate. It's set in Vietnam. I think it looks at war and family and race and identity. It's meant to be, I think, quite lyrical because Ocean Vuong is a poet. And I don't know why I haven't read it yet. Next is a very popular book. It's The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This is the first book in the Wayfarers series. It's sci-fi, which is something I don't read a lot of. All I really know about this is it's about a group of people who were on a spaceship called the Wayfarer travelling across the galaxy. I believe this is more of a character focused book rather than plot focused, so I'm not sure how I'm going to get on with it. I'm not entirely sure what the queerness in this book entails, but a lot of people love this book, so I am interested to give it a go. Next is Ruby Fruit Jungle by Rita Mae Brown. So this is a book that was published in the 70s. It's set in New York in the 1950s, and we follow a young woman called Molly who, according to the blurb, is a badass rebel. I think it is a bit of a coming of age story. This is meant to be sort of a lesbian modern classic, so I'm keen to give that a read. The next book on my list is The Seep by Chana Porter. So this is about Trina, who is a 50-year-old woman who is trans. She lives with her wife, and there has been a worldwide alien invasion called The Seep. This book is meant to be a blend of social commentary and speculative fiction, and it sounds kind of weird, and I'm definitely intrigued. Next, we have a series of books. I don't often read series. This is a trilogy. The 3rd book, I think, is due to be published later this year. Obviously, it depends if I actually like the first book, if I continue with the series, but it does sound really, really good. So the first book is called A Marvellous Light by Freya and Marske. So I think this series, I think it's historical fiction, but with fantastical elements. So in this one, the first book in the series, main character is called Robin, and he works as parliamentary liaison to a hidden society of magicians, which sounds intriguing. And I think there's like secrecy and magical stuff and the relationship that Robin has with another man. That's really all I know. The second book, I actually have both these books out of the library at the moment, so hopefully I'll read them soon, is A Restless Truth. This one I think sounds even better than that one. So in this one we follow Maud, who has always longed for an adventure. So she's volunteered as a lady's companion, and they go travelling on an ocean liner. But Maud didn't expect the old lady to turn up dead on the very first day of the voyage. So I think this is a murder mystery set at sea. And then there's another character called Violet, who is dangerously outrageous, apparently, and a magnet for scandal. So that sounds like a lot of fun. The 3rd one, I can't remember what it's called, but I think it is due out later this year. Next is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston, something a bit different from me. So I think this is a bit of a rom-com. I did pick up Red, White and Royal Blue by this author a couple of years ago, and I DNF'd it. I didn't get on with it. But One Last Stop does intrigue me, so I'm going to pick it up at some point. So our main character is called August. She works in a diner in New York, and on the subway she meets this other woman called Jane. But it appears that Jane has somehow been displaced in time from the 1970s. So I think this is a love story with some time travel, time skippy type elements. Next is a modern classic, The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. I am going to be reading this later in the year as a buddy read with Gemma from Gem of Books. I don't actually know that much about the plot of The Colour Purple, but from what I hear, I think it's quite devastating and it's going to be quite a difficult read. Next is a collection of short stories, Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. I read this author's memoir in the Dream House a couple of years ago and loved it. So I'm really keen to get to this one. I think it is kind of weird, horror, sci-fi, speculative type stuff. Really keen to get to that. Then we actually have two classics. I don't read a lot of classics, and I can't say that I'll definitely get to these this year, because for both of these books I think I will have to be in the right mood for them. The first is Orlando by Virginia Woolf, and my only experience with Virginia Woolf is I DNF'd Mrs. Dalloway last year. But Orlando sounds intriguing, so I think it's about someone who kind of travels through time and ends up in like different bodies. So I think it looks at gender and identity. I don't know, it kind of sounds wild, so I'm intrigued. And then the next is The Well of Loneliness by Radclyffe Hall, which is a lesbian classic, first published in the 1920s. It was banned for obscenity, I believe, even though from what I've read it wasn't particularly graphic at all. It was because it features lesbians that it was banned. But anyway, I believe this book is very, very miserable. So I'll need to be in the right mood for this. I think it's a bit of a coming of age story as well. So those are all the fiction books that I want to read, as in the ones that I haven't read before. Then we have two non-fiction books. The first is Outrageous by Paul Baker. The subtitle is The Story of Section 28 and Battle for Britain's LGBT Education. So Section 28 was a piece of legislation that was in force from 1988 until the early 2000s, and it prohibited teachers from promoting homosexuality, and what it led to is teachers feeling unable to even sort of acknowledge homosexuality in any way. I think to the extent that they felt they couldn't even challenge homophobic bullying. So the reason I'm interested in particular to read this is because those years pretty much correspond with my time at school. But I was completely oblivious at the time to Section 28's existence, and it wasn't until many years later that I became aware of it. So I am really interested to read this book. It's one that I might actually request that the library purchases, because I feel like there'd be other people who'd be interested to read this as well. So I might put in a library request, and if they turn me down, I will buy it. The next piece of non-fiction I want to read is Ace by Angela Chen. The subtitle of this book is What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society and the Meaning of Sex. So last year I read a non-fiction called Ace Voices by Eris Young, which I thought was great, and I have realised that ace identities is something that I understand very little about and want to learn more about. Ace by Angela Chen was referenced several times in Ace Voices, and I have heard lots of positive reviews of Ace by Angela Chen, so I am really keen to get to that one. And then we'll finish off by talking about some of the fiction that I want to reread this year. So we will, of course, start with Sarah Waters, who is my favourite author, and I am currently working my way through rereading all of her 6 novels. I'm halfway through that project. So the next one I think I'll be picking up is The Paying Guests. This is described as a love story and crime drama. Out of all of Sarah Waters' books, this is the one that I remember the least about. So I'm really keen to head back to it. It's set in 1920s London, and we follow a mother and daughter who decide to take in a couple as paying guests. That's all I know. The next Sarah Waters I'll be reading then is Tipping the Velvet, which is probably her most famous novel, I would say. This is set in the Victorian period, and we follow an oyster girl who falls for another woman who performs on stage as a male impersonator. And then the final Sarah Waters book that I'll be rereading is The Little Stranger, which is a ghost story following a doctor who goes to stay in this old crumbling house with a family. One of them is unwell and potentially the house is haunted. The Little Stranger is not queer in terms of its content, but I'll mention it on this list because it's Sarah Waters. The next book I want to reread, hopefully quite soon, is Carol by Patricia Highsmith, which was originally published as The Price of Salt. So this is a book I read a few years ago and absolutely loved, and I've seen several booktubers recently read this and really love it. I think including Chen, the librarian. I think she read it towards the end of last year. So Carol is about a young woman who's working in a department store in New York, and she encounters an older woman who is married to a man, and it's about the relationship that develops between the two of them. And then the final book and the final reread will be Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. This was on the Booker long list a couple of years ago, and it is a very strange book. We follow a couple called Rachel and Eliza, and one day Rachel wakes up in bed terrified because an ant has crawled into her eye and is like in her brain, and she is absolutely convinced that this has definitely happened. It wasn't a dream, it definitely happened. Eliza is a scientist and cannot believe this could be true, and then this sort of threatens their relationship. This is described on the back as a uniquely imaginative sequence of interlinked stories ranging across time, place and perspective to form a sparkling philosophical tale of love lost and found across the universe. And I don't know how to describe it other than that, really, because this is a book that when I read it, I absolutely loved it, but I also wasn't sure I totally understood it. I made the mistake the first time I read this of reading it as if it were short stories, but I think it needs to be read as a novel, because it is a novel. So there's definitely sort of connections and things that I will have missed the first time around. It is quite philosophical, it is quite weird, but I absolutely loved it, so I am keen to give that a reread. So those are the books that are on my sort of Queer TBR Tackle list. I am conscious, and I only realised this after compiling the list, that this is quite a lesbian-centric list. I do read other sort of types of queer books. It just so happens all these seem to be featuring lesbians. I will almost certainly read other queer books during the year. There'll be other books new books that come out that I'm not aware of, or books that I'll hear about, recommended by other people that I'm sure I will pick up during the year. Last year, according to Storygraph, I read 34 books that are sort of shelved as LGBT on Storygraph. So almost certainly there will be more. Let me know if you are going to be joining in with the Queer TBR Tackle, and let me know what queer books you are planning on reading this year, because I am always on the lookout for more recommendations. Thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye.